All right, so 2:30. Are we live?
Yep.
All right, well, welcome everyone to a lecture on bats. It started out, my proposal was to share some material about some research I'm doing up in Borrego Palm Canyon. And I gave that talk to some high schoolers over here at Borrego Springs High School. And for that, I realized they probably don't know much about bats, so I put a bat module together. And that's what you're going to hear too. So we're going to have a Bats 101, and we're going to talk a little bit about the research. The slides go about 35 minutes or so. I have some videos. This hybrid is sort of an interesting dynamic because here I can field your questions and we'll do that. And the audience in the webinar will be moderated by Brianna over here using, I guess you wanted them to use chat. What should I announce? Use chat if you have a question.
Q&A.
Q&A, okay. So those of you in internet land, use the Q&A. I'll make sure to answer bat-related questions in the first part, research questions in the second part, or any leftovers that you have. And I will stick around at the end if you want to take a look at some of the displays or just have some questions that you think of during the talk. So let's start out.
Doc, I think a quick announcement.
Oh, a quick announcement.
Yeah, sorry, really quick announcement.
You wanna-
Welcome everybody to
You want
the
to be
bat
on this
lecture.
side of
Oh.
the camera?
I'm in. Welcome everybody to the bat lecture. Really excited to have you. So there's a little schedule change. So we're actually going to be meeting at 6:30 p.m. tonight at Christmas Circle. If you're coming out for the bat night walk, have a lot of cool activities and stuff, and I'm going to find some bats around town. So feel free to. I can give you a business card with my contact information on it too, and we have some maps printed out with right where you need to go. So 6:30 p.m. tonight at Christmas Circle. And yeah, Don, take it away.
Oh, okay. By the way, that schedule changed for those on the field trip. The last 2 nights have been out sampling bats, and basically they're not waking up very early. So the earliest bats I've recorded have been around 7:20. So we're going to have a nice leisurely drive over to Palms at Indian Head, watch sunset, and be there as bats emerge. We may or may not see them there, but we'll certainly hear them. We'll talk about that a little later. So first of all, I have some slides on this, but for my campfire talks or school talks, puppets are always nice. And they're a little bigger. So this is a big brown bat, which is actually about this size. I'm going to show you. So bats are chiroptera, which means hand wave. So bats are flying with their hands. These are their first 2 fingers up in the front. So those 2 fingers, third finger, pinky leg, and the membrane between their fingers is what they're flying with. I have a sample here. It's not nice and fuzzy like this. It's more like a nitro glove. This hybrid is such a challenge. But we're not going to forget you out there in webinar land. So it's about the same consistency. Of course, it has tendons and blood vessels and all of that. Other things, bats are the only mammal that can fly, true flight. So gliding squirrels, sugar gliders. So where it says they glide, they take off and just sort of go as far as on their downward flight as they can get. The other thing that's not unique but unusual about bats is they see with sound, and that's what we're going to be mostly talking about in the second part, sampling their calls. It's called echolocation. They squeak with their larynx and listen to echoes coming back, and we can identify them to a degree by those calls. Another thing the kids always like when I show a bat is a unique aspect of their leg. So if I were a bat, and I bent my knees, They don't go that way, they go that way. Their legs are rotated, that upper leg is rotated 180 from ours, so they face in the opposite direction. So that's a quiz question. Why does anyone think it would be advantageous for a bat's legs to be backward? Anyone?
So they can hang on to the walls, ceilings, caves,
What's that?
to hang on to the ceilings of caves.
Well, they hang on with their feet, yes. So that's part of the answer. But there's another part to it though.
Tucking up for flank, maybe?
Okay, those two are together are the answer. It's that if they're hanging by their feet, against their wings are tucked in. If their feet were like ours, they would fly into whatever they're hanging against, like the cave wall. But as it is, now they can fly away. Feet are going in the direction. Great, okay, you guys passed.
Any other mammals like that?
Not that I'm aware. So the question is, are there any other mammals like that? Not that I'm aware. I don't know. I think orangutan, I think that, well, they don't hang by their feet anyway. I don't know. I'm not aware of one. If you find one, let me know. So we're going to shift now to slides. I can get this here. And this is probably the slide I should have had showing the beginning. I'm going to wait for some things to get out of the way here. So native bats of Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. I'm waiting for the screen share to go away. Come on. Sorry. I don't know why that's doing that. Maybe it'll hide in a minute. So the title of my technical talk, Acoustic Survey of Native Bat Species Following Fire and Desert Palm Growth. So that's Borrego Palm Canyon first growth. And I've been sampling there since May. Actually, I started in April, but my date goes back to May. And this talk is going to be some background about the fire. Again, our Bats 101. We'll have a short break. Then we'll go into the research aspects of this. And the whole talk is about an hour and a half end to end. And again, I will stay after if you had any more questions. So human caused fire at First Grove. Anyone here from Borrego Springs, I'm guessing? And so, yeah, January 2020, pretty much torched it. And there were local paper and San Diego paper articles saying all the bats burned up because there are bats that roost in palm fronds, particularly the western yellow bat. So the trail was closed, actually closed for quite a while during that whole year due to COVID. And I was fortunate to have a proposal I submitted approved by the park. So for the last 2 years, I go once or twice a month to sample for bats in the grove. And we'll talk about that methodology in a bit. So here's what it looked like the day of the fire. Seco loaned me these photos. So pretty much no palms. Well, the palms are there, they just don't look very good. This is my research permit. And no one had ever studied the bats in Borrego Palm Canyon. So unfortunately, we don't have a baseline. The study is sort of a baseline in reverse. Who was there right after the fire and who is there now? And I actually don't know how long I'm going to run the study. This is the 24th month. I just put the recorder up yesterday. Again, I may carry it for 3 years. We'll see. So the location, those of you local certainly aware. And let's see, this pointer isn't relating very well. Up here is First Grove. Here's the campground, upper campground, trailhead, and main trail, alternate trail. I guess for those who aren't familiar with it, we're out here east of the Salton Sea and west of the Pacific Ocean. A little more detail, the nearest water, this is a pond that's at a waterfall at First Grove. You can't get there now. It's been closed off the last 2 years. And at the Pupfish Pond, or all those swimming pools in town. And the golf course pools like at the Borrego Springs Resort and over at the Roadrunner. So that's where the water is. This is where the study is. And I've got to record it right in the center of the grove. which is right here. And if you take that, you can still hike. There are plenty of folks on the hike on the trail yesterday and today. There's an overlook right up there. That's the end of the trail. So it's beyond the center of the grove. So for comparison, that's what the grove looked like May 2020. So remember that first photo in January, all the crowns are gone. Looks like dead stalks. But they actually come back pretty quickly. I've seen that in northern Baja. I've seen it out by Palm Springs. Palms are incredibly resilient as long as they still have the roots and their water sources. That's April 2021. This is in the grove, which is where the recorder is, facing up in May. And this is January. It pretty much looks the same today, but looking up and the grove, and you can see, wow, you could hardly tell it had burned. I can tell you that underneath it's still pretty charred. There isn't a lot growing there. It's going to take a while to recover. So it's really a good thing it is closed. We don't have folks tromping it down. Give it a chance to come back. So that's the background of why I have a study. Get a baseline. Who's up there? How much did the fire affect it? Really hasn't been a topic of study that I'm aware in bat populations. So I've given you a preview from Bats 101, right? They're on the mammal that can fly, use sound echoes. They're warm-bodied. They're placental birth. So just like us, they have fur. The mothers nurse the babies with milk. So the mothers go out and forage for insects. All of our local bats are insectivores, so they hunt insects. We do have bats that come up from Mexico that are nectivores. The Mexican long-nosed, long-tongued, those species are pollinators. They go for agave, they call them nerd, cactus, etc. Let's see, more than 1,400 species. So a quarter of all the mammal species in the world are bats. That's pretty amazing. It's not the number of mammals, it's the number of species. And I write 1,400 rather than a specific number because every time I give this talk, it's a different number. They keep finding new species of bats, especially in the tropics. Already talked about this a little bit with my puppet, the big brown bat. Unlike birds, where the joints have fused, bats maintain their fingers. They're not hollow. They're solid bones. I have the specimen you can look at later, and I'll put it here so the folks on the webinar can see it. So they're just very small diameter. They're very flexible, but they're solid bones. And they're pretty sturdy bodies, surprisingly, for such a fragile looking animal. And you can see here on the lower left, the thumb is that part that you usually see on a bat, and the fingers are tucked in the skin. These are some of our local bats. The question is, how big are they? Almost all of them will fit in the palm of your hand. So they're very small. Some of them weigh barely more than a Hershey's Kiss. So they're small, they're agile, they're light, but some of them are pretty big. The Western Mastiff bat, I have a, let's see, I thought I had a picture, yeah. How big are they? So the folks, the bats that you see at twilight, especially around here, all the way to the coast, are canyon bats. Those used to be called Western pipistrelles. Discovered they weren't pipistrelle, that's a different genus. Canyon bats, so they really are tiny. And then the mastiff bat has a wingspan of maybe 22 inches or so. Both of those are in San Diego County. Both of those are in Borrego Palm, Canada. I've recorded both of those. And our little guy over here, the pallid bat, I don't know that we had one there. That's an intermediate species. But when you see the samples over there, you can compare them. Let's see, I want to go back here. No, I'm going to skip that. So what do they eat? I already mentioned our bats eat insects. Some of the bats feed on nectar. Again, those are Mexican, mostly Mexican residents or farther south come forward. We have no fruit-eating bats here. So we had some discussion earlier about flying foxes. There are some fruit-eating bats in the Caribbean and point south, but not in North America. It's all about insects. Pallid bat, that's our guy over here in the display case. He's a gleaner, so rather than catch insects on the fly, listens to them on the ground or on vegetation, gets down and pounces on them. I have a video for you showing that. They especially like scorpions. So if you have a scorpion control problem, maybe you want to have a pellet bat or two around. How do bats drink? I got this question at one of my talks. A young middle schooler didn't know the answer, so I had to go research it and go out and take some photos. So it turns out they drink, it would be too dangerous to land. Something's going to eat them. So they fly over the water, either sip it with their mouth and make multiple passes, or get their belly fur wet and then drink that from their fur. Echolocation, and that's the key to the study that I can do. Seeing with sound. So they're squeaking at very high frequency, very loud, it turns out, listening for echoes. And we're going to get a little bit more detail here. When I say loud, some of the species, I know the pocketed freetails up here, I pick them up all the time, all over the desert area. They're probably close to 130 to 140 decibels, which is like having your house, if you were living next to a bat colony, your house on the flight deck of a carrier during flight ops, right next to the exhaust of the jet. Super loud. It's so loud that one, we don't quite know why they don't deafen their neighbors. What's the adaptation? But so they don't self-deafen, they actually squeeze the muscles for the inner ear to separate the bones so they don't hear their call, and then relax it again so they can hear the echo back. Yeah, pretty loud. It's most of their calls are, it depends on the species. I have some plots, but are generally above human hearing. There are a few species that folks can hear. I'm told that like a mastiff bat sounds a bit like a towhee, if you know the bird, the towhee, with chirp sounds. Even with hearing aids, I can't hear anything in that range anymore. So this is a Western yellow bat. This is the bat that is really the focus of my study. The reports were, these were killed by the fire. They do roost in palms. And so the hypothesis was, the palms burned, the bats burned before they could get out, because daytime they would be sleeping. But this is Lily. She was an ambassador with Project Wildlife, which I support in San Diego, rehabilitating wildlife, including bats. And she couldn't be released to the wild, but at one program, I saw her moving her mouth. And I put a microphone, actually this microphone here. Let's see if I can get my mouse here. So it sounds a little bit like static. She's squeaking and seeing, what's going on out there. Another way to analyze it isn't just listening to it, because that's kind of hard to tell what that was based on those sounds, is to analyze it with spectrograms. So this is a spectrogram. These are thousandths of a second across, and these are 1,000 cycles up. So each of those bars, I think she's a 30 kilohertz bat, so that's 30,000 cycles. The upper part of human hearing is maybe 10 young ones, and here probably maybe 15 or so. So well above our range. So bat echolocation isn't just about not bumping into things at night, although they do use it for navigation, the commuting calls. That's the search phase. They use a different call when they're after acquisition, which is hunting for insects, hunting for something tasty. And then at the very end, when they get close, they speed up the call. That's the terminal phase, and usually catch the insect. They also have social calls. And I'm going into this in detail because the research study is recording their calls and figuring out who's there and what they're up to. Unlike bird calls, bird calls are pretty distinct. Bird calls are largely about who I am. I am a mockingbird. I've heard that outside my tent, campsite the last couple of mornings. I'm a mockingbird, I'm a male, this is my territory, and I'm available. A bat is telling you, I'm about this size, and I'm hunting insects about this size, and I kind of live in this kind of habitat. But in general, they're close enough to a consistent pattern that we can make some pretty informed determinations of what actually made that sound. But it's a utility, it's a tool, it's not a ID. It's a little example showing how the calls vary in those different phases. And as I say, it varies by species, where they are, what kind of terrain it is, what stage of hunting or navigation they are, and their prey. So bats that eat small insects have very high calls. And they have high calls because the high frequency is required for you to get an echo back. If you had a low call, your call will just go zooming right by the insect and you won't hear anything. If you're a moth eater, like Mexican freetails, which are kind of generalists, it'll be a lower call, and that's so that you get the echoes there. So it's a range. There are multiple techniques, field techniques in bat research. Mist netting is a time-proven one. It's where you put, this lower right picture, that's at Coyote Canyon second crossing. And it looks like a volleyball net. You stretch it across the flyway. After it gets dark, the bats will start flying into it, get caught like this. We monitor them with night vision, either binoculars or monoculars, usually put infrared light so we can see as soon as they get caught, get them out. This would be for identification, sometimes for survey, you might want to get some blood specimens. In other locations, you might use that to band them to see where they go during the year. Not as used as much. It's not something the bats are enjoying. So that's mist netting. Roost surveys go into caves. So this is one up in the lagunas that has Townsend's big-eared bats. That's a species of special concern. They're somewhat disruptive, and you really need to be careful about when you go in there. If it's a maternity colony, which does exist in this particular cave, you want to make sure you're not there when they're a baby. So again, that's a technique to, get eyes on the bats, but and things like, again, measuring them, identification, etc. Those are the typical traditional ways. Acoustic monitoring is the one I'm using, which is a non-invasive technique. One little historic aside. Until World War II, no one knew bats echolocated. We didn't know how they navigated in the dark. We didn't know how they caught food in the dark. We just knew they did it. And it was the development of electronics and high frequency microphones and processors that could process the data that led to the discovery that bats echolocate. So it's pretty new overall. Imagine a bat's been around, bats have been around at least 60 million years, and humans, obviously not that long, but we've only known for 80 years that they echolocate. So acoustic monitoring, I've got a sample up here. I have another one on the desk, but hands-free, you just leave them out and let the bats document themselves. You process it on computers to look at what their calls look like. And that data, of course, can be shared electronically. So all sorts of good reasons to do acoustic monitoring. Do they use ultrasonic microphones? This is one here, this little orange piece. I think it'll show up on the camera. Just the orange is the microphone. This is connected to an iPad. I'm going to show you another one. This is a standalone. This one, whoops. This system will last overnight if it's not too cold. So you get a night's worth of calls. Tonight, when we do the field trip, this is what we're going to have in the field, and we'll go see, who's out there. But the real way to get data is to leave them and then have longer periods of time to get your data. So this is with a cover. It's just a green cover. This is a standalone unit. It's like, yay, I put these all over. I only have one, but I put them in various places here in Anza-Borrego. Most recently out in the desert Kauai section by the Salton Sea. Microphones here, batteries, memory card. This one I can leave out for at least a week. And that's kind of a big deal. I'm going to show you a different one. See, this is the one we're talking about here. This is a commercial product. If you're really into this, get inspired, you too can have a microphone, hook it to your iPhone or your Android or your tablet, and go record bats. Let's see, I wanted to say, no, I think we'll skip that. Let's look at what some of the calls look like on a spectrogram and how they sound artificially modified. So, of course, we can't hear this. We're going to first hear a canyon bat. That's our little guy, smallest bat in North America, ones we see at twilight. 45 kilohertz, so 45,000 cycles per second. No way we're going to hear any of that. And they're kind of like a metronome. So the processing lowers the frequency into hearable range and slows it down. Some bats call, those squeaks are like 200 times a second. So there's no way we would hear it in two different ways, how short the pulses are and how fast they're coming at us and how high. So the miracles of computer processing will make something we can hear. So this is a canyon bat. My mouse will behave itself. I can play these back and it would sound like static when we were Western yellow bat, the first bat. But with this sound processing, it's actually possible to learn your calls audibly. So you can be out just hearing this in real time. Oh yeah, that's a canyon bat. Oh, no, we got a Western yellow. Ah, Mexican freetail just came through because of the difference in the process sound. Next one is the Mexican, let's see, I think, yeah, Mexican freetail bat. We'll see some of these tonight at the high school. They're lower. That was quite different, wasn't it? These guys have a very diverse diet, diverse habitat, and diverse calls. So their calls were kind of all over the place. And the one I played is the standard one. Sometimes it's a party. The first place we're going to go tonight for the bat calls is at, I still call it Oberg's, but Palms at Indian Head. We'll be by the old foundations. And these are three species I get there pretty regularly, all at the same time. So they're hunting different foods. They're not competing with each other. So they're coexisting. And this is, it sounds a little crazy at times. Let's see. Whoops. Should have gone right. There we go. That's pocketed freetail. The high one's the myotis. And there's that intermediate one that's a little more chirpy. That's the yellow bat. All at the same time. And it's pretty amazing. I have a video showing some of them flying around there that I'll show just before the break. So their calls have a lot of variability. The colors correspond to species. So how long the calls, look at this is a massive bat, all the way from 5 milliseconds out here to 25. So a lot of variety, but there's nobody else in that range other than the spotted bat, which is a much choppier, shorter call. Lots of overlap. So when I say we can identify species, in some cases, yes, it's probably that species. In some cases, can't really tell. There's a lot of activity in the 20s that are too similar, low 30s. So sometimes Mexican big brown bats and pallid bats are really close to the same calls. Sometimes hoary bat and Mexican freetails are very close, depending on what the bat was doing. They also, those species have signature calls, and that's no question. Yep, that was a hoary bat. But the ones I did here, I still haven't got one that I can say, yep, that's a hoary bat. Let's see, this is a lot of words. I've already talked about most of this. Their calls will also vary if they're hunting with neighbors. So let's say the pocketed freetails fly out of Palm Canyon. Someone told me they can see at times the stream of bats coming out of the canyon toward town. Those are probably the pocketed freetails. But when they're hunting together in an area, they'll shift up and down a little bit in frequency. So they're, that's mine, and yours is up there. Something relatively recently discovered was jamming. Some folks did some studies in some of the caves in Texas and found that some of the Mexican freetails were sending out jamming signals. Go over there, there's an insect. Whoop, So yeah, we're finding all sorts of amazing things about bats. This is off topic, but I'll share it with you. Another recent study on bats coming out of caves was, how do they avoid missing each other? In Bracken Cave in Texas, and I have a little video of this too, 20 million bats come out every night during the breeding season. They're all females. There are 20 million babies in the cave. Every night they're coming out, it takes them several hours to get out. Question was, well, how do they avoid it? I mean, they call them bat nados. How do they? Well, it turns out with high-speed video, they discovered they weren't avoiding each other. They were bumping and running. It turns out to be less energy to do that than try to control yourself and not get too close to a neighbor. So might not have any prospective PhD candidates out here, but there are some great studies still available in bat research. So if you know anyone who would like to go back to school.
I have a question about that. Do they go back? Do we know if they go back to their particular baby? I mean, how can they find their baby after 20 minutes?
So the great question. The question is, so how do they find their baby? Do they go back to the same baby? Yes, they only go back to their baby. One of 20 million in a dark cave with 20 other million babies. I have a video of that. We'll see some of that. We think it's one they know generally where they left it, although they're packed 500 per square feet. The 500 babies in over there. So location, by their calls, they do recognize the baby's call, although one of 500 are mine, and by smell. So those are 3 ways. But yes, they go back every night. They probably fly 40, 50 miles a night, foraging, and then come back, 20 million, not all at once, but back in here and find their babies. So they have to be fed every night.
Does their echolocation help define the position of the baby based on the texture of the cave wall?
So the question is, does the echolocation help them define the texture, the location in the cave?
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. But we don't have any way to look inside their brains, what's the processing, but yeah, they're getting close to that square foot, the right square foot. There's some great acoustic maps I've seen of some of the major caves where some folks have gone in and used sonar technique and what does this cave look like acoustically? And it's pretty distinctive. I mean, it's almost like, well, think of sonar imaging something underwater. So is there another question?
So yeah, I had a question back to the call of babies.
Calls of babies.
Yeah, are you equating call and echolocation the same?
That's a great question. So am I equating echolocation with the calls between mom and baby? And they're different. The mechanics are the same, but they're lower frequency. They're called social directives. Some species are more chatty than others. This pallid bat I keep pointing at is a particularly chatty one. Those conversations are down in audible range, so 10,000 or less. I just signed up for a webinar for how to interpret social calls, but they're still using sound, but it's more like us having a conversation. They're having a conversation. They're not sending out these 140 decibel boom, is there a palm tree out there kind of thing. Great question. Yeah. I didn't show it in this presentation. In my campfire talks, I have one of Yuma majoris, and Well, you'll see these are calls that they make. So let's look at a few videos. Then we'll have our break. And what I'm going to do is a new share, and hopefully this works in video land too. The first one is going to show you a bat in flight. This is a big brown bat. Big brown bat. And this is one that's studied a lot in research context. So we're going to go here. Hopefully that's showing up for, I want to make, hold on, I want to make sure that it did get shared. Yes, it did. Okay.
I can see it.
Things to watch, it's flying with its mouth open, it's echolocating. Like any predator, it's holding its head very still, even though it's flying much further. Pretty stable stuff. Just as I know, I've done some. I know, now take a look. Maybe after the talk, I can show some live and slow motion. And reminded the cheetah, if you watch a cheetah running, that head isn't going up like that, it's drops on, it's got a gyro system. Different species have different flight characteristics. Mexican freetails have long, slender wings. They're considered the greyhound of our bats. Put some radio collars on them just a few years ago. In Texas, flew next to 4 of them with a Cessna airplane and found the fastest of the 4 was flying 100 miles an hour. 100 miles an hour, unwinded, which is faster than any other animal. Well, peregrines, I monitor peregrines. Peregrines fly about 50 to 60. They dive at 200, but they're not flying that fast. Not only do they fly 100 miles an hour at times, they fly to 10,000 feet. So this is a bat that's smaller than this controller. Wings are about like a 10,000 feet, 100 miles an hour. We have the pallid bat, which has a stubbier wing, and it's more like a hover because it's flying slowly, listening on the ground for things moving on the ground, and then drops down. So it doesn't need to go 100 miles an hour. It needs to fly quietly and low. And there are bats all over in between. Some of them like to be right over water. Some of them like hunting in forest and have great skills at avoiding obstacles. Okay, so that was big brown bat flying. Question I often get in campfire talks or school context: why are their teeth so sharp? Anyone want to shout out an answer to that? Why are bats? And they are. I mean, they really are like needles. Those of us who work with bats, there is a very low percentage of chance of rabies, as in any wild animal. So we get rabies shot because hamburgers get nipped all the time. But why are their teeth so sharp? A big brown bat was a great example. It looked like it was flying into jaws.
Maybe to grab on effectively to the exoskeleton of insects.
Exoskeleton of insects. Yes, and it's not to grab on, it's to puncture it,
Yeah.
get to the food, eject the stuff that's no good, and move on to the next insect.
And the nectarnivorous bats probably don't have such teeth.
I've never looked at the teeth of a nectarnivorous bat, but yeah, they're using their tongue to probe the blossoms. By the way, nectarnivorous bats, pollinators of the original banana, guava, papaya, columnar cactus, so saguaro, Oregon pipe, those are plants that open white flowers at night, bats and moths. And some of the flowers have evolved to be like a parabolic reflector. So they're telling the bat, come to me, get my nectar and pollinate me. The next one I'm going to show is the pallid bat, and this is my favorite specimen. These are from the Natural History Museum in San Diego, by the way. So this is a pallid bat. Get close enough. This is our gleaner, scorpion eater. We're going to see a little video about this guy. We have these here in Borrego. I record them. I'm usually in campsite 24 in the campground when I'm out to do talks. And I get them there. I get them up in the grove, and they're undoubtedly around town. This is one of the chatty ones. We had a situation in Ramona, east of Ramona, heat wave a couple of years ago, 115 in Ramona in July. And all these baby pallid bats fell out at this house. Fortunately, the woman was very bat aware. They were brought to Project Wildlife. We actually went and got them. And the poor caretaker who had those babies for a couple of nights said it was just nonstop chatter all night long. So this is a pallid bat. See, we're at 40 minutes. Oops, I'm sorry, that's not a pallid bat. It should be this one.
Slicing through the shadows, scanning for prey hidden under a cloak of darkness. Bats are masters of the night sky, thanks to their twin superpowers, flight and echolocation, using sound waves to find prey. So, what the heck is this one doing? It's hunting on the ground and not flying. Kind of an undignified way to catch a meal, isn't it? I mean, for a bat. Turns out echolocation, that natural sonar bats use, isn't the killer technique you'd think. Like it's not actually that sneaky. We can't hear the frequency that bats put out, but to a moth, it's louder than a scream. More like a jet taking off. It's kind of a dead giveaway. And some prey have found ways to fight back. This tiger moth is loaded up on a diet of toxic plants that make him disgusting to eat. A fact he broadcasts with warning clicks from an organ called a timbal. The same one cicadas used to sing. Bats learn as pups to stay away. And these hawk moths can scramble bat sonar by emitting clicks from their genitals. It's a dogfight that bats are starting to lose. That's why some, like this pallid bat, are changing the game. She still echolocates, but only to navigate. And she keeps the volume low. She's a whispering bat. When it's time to hunt, she goes into stealth mode. Her ears point down, where scorpions and crickets are milling in the loose earth. And she listens. Look at those ears again. They're huge relative to her tiny skull. They do a great job of capturing and amplifying sound, especially the low-pitched noises of scurrying prey. And see that funny flap? It's called the tragus. They provide extra information about where a sound is coming from. We have them too, but in a bat, they're way bigger. And the bat has a final card to play here. She's immune to scorpion venom. But the sting rattles her a little. It's not as graceful as the high-flying aerobatics, but hey, it works.
Yeah, scorpions.
A lot of people really
With 40
Or
million
Mexican
bats,
pigtails.
this is now the biggest colony in the world. Yet, at the moment of birth, each mother and baby are on their own. Like a safety rope, the umbilical cord connects them, but not for long. They've got just 1 hour to learn each other's unique smell and call before the cord breaks. It's a lesson no baby can afford to miss. Because then the mother must leave it. To survive, each baby must stay put, clinging to the ceiling for dear life. For down below them, triggered by the urine from the bats, a mass of flesh-eating bugs are hatching. In an ironic twist of fate, the colony creates its own killers.
This is what an outflight looks like. This is Bracken.
As dusk falls, the mothers begin the night hunt. They've got just a few hours before they must return to their babies. But with 20 million new mouths to feed, where on earth can they find enough food to sustain them? The answer lies a mile above the Texan hills. It'll be a race against time, but the colony has a very clear and specific target. Now, over 100 million bats invade the sky as other colonies join forces. They're all on a collision course. At 10,000 feet, the bats fan out to face another airborne battalion flying towards them. It's billions of moths heading to their summer feeding grounds. Incredibly, just when they need a massive food supply, 250 tons of flying insects arrive on the scene.
Off there. Anyone been to Carlsbad Caverns? Same species, only there are probably less than 1 million now. So that's 20 times the event that's at Carlsbad. If you join Bat Conservation International, they own the property with that cave, and you can sign up and go for those out flights. They're actually just put out their schedule a little while ago. So this is time for a break, but any more questions here, and then we'll check with the webinar.
Yeah, a couple of questions on your research. Can you get any indication of the number of individuals, or can you just identify species?
Okay, so the question is, can I identify individuals acoustically? No. And I can't really tell how many, because I would have the same results if one bat did, 20 passes, or 20 bats did one pass, but when there are concurrent, multiples of the same individual in the same recording, I know there's more than one. So it's really an indicator of activity, and sort of a rule of thumb, more activity tends to be more bats, but it's not a census. There's no way to really do a census in that method. So, great question. Sure.
Was Project Wildlife able to save the babies in Ramona?
Pardon?
Was Project Wildlife able to save those babies
So Project Wildlife, can they save the babies?
in Ramona, the ones? that-
Oh, yes, they did.
They did.
In fact, I've got photos, if you'd like to see them later, of us taking them back and on a ladder, there was a 2-story house and putting them back up under the tiles. And the moms were recognizing the babies coming back in. It was just awesome.
Wow, that is amazing.
What was question one?
My second question was, did you say they were 60 million years? They've been around for 60 million years.
Mhm.
So how do we know that? And are they all around? Are they on every continent?
Oh, okay, that's a 2-part question. So I think the number was actually 52 million is the oldest fossil. So it's a fossil. I have some photos in a campfire talk. Those really fine sediments, I'm pretty sure it was in Europe, same area that you had the sediments, say, for finding Archaeopteryx, the dinosaur, feathered dinosaur. So it's very rare to find a bat fossil. Look how tiny it is.
It's like,
But there are a couple of instances that I found, and the dates of that sediment are 52 million. So now the second question.
Are they all around the world?
They're all around the world. Oh, I took that one out. They're not in the extreme polar regions, but they go all the way up to Alaska. And they go down to South America, and tip of South America, but they're primarily, the largest numbers have a heat map or tropical. So they sort of, in both species variety and numbers, the farther you get away from the equator, they start thinning out.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, how do the native people respond to bats? Did they eat them? Were they afraid of them? Do we have any information all on the native people and bats?
So the question for those on the webinar is, how did native people treat bats? In Mesoamerica, they were associated with the death god Camus, C-A-M-A-S. So they're a creature of the night, of the underworld. That's one culture. I know the Mimbres culture, so New Mexico, they have those great designs in pottery of different animals. They have some very realistic representations. I actually have a replica bowl of a bat in the Mimbres style. So at least they were observant and had the physiology right and the design of the bat right. Yeah, I don't know, say the Kumeyaay or Kauai. I'm sure if you live outdoors at night, you see bats. When I've done the sheep count up at Fourth Grove for a number of years, you see bats coming around. And you weren't really even paying attention, they're just there, so you have neighbors. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe you could research that and let me know what you find. Okay, one more question.
Has bat vision been researched?
Bat vision. Bats can see, so bats aren't blind. So they could see in the day. If you went into a roost site, they could certainly see you. But how good the vision, I'm sure it varies by species. Now, flying foxes, the daytime species, say in Indonesia, Australia, they're clearly seeing just fine because they don't even echolocate. So I don't know, of eye tests, but that would be another good research question. I'll have to look that up. Thanks. Brianna, do we have any webinar questions before we take our postponed break?
You do. Oliver's going to read it in the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, and you're just speaking to this, but Doug from the webinar asked, why did bat species lose their sight? So it sounds like they didn't, but why did their sight
Okay,
get a little
bats
worse?
didn't lose their sight. Some see better than others. So, yeah, I guess the answer is they haven't lost their sight.
And Carla was wondering, do you have any little brown bats?
Do I have any little brown bats? There are no little brown bats recorded in San Diego County. The closest that I'm aware of is up by Mount San Jacinto, so that'd be Riverside County. Our closest are Myota species. Well, we'll see the list of the ones we have in a little bit. So that's it. Let's take 5, and then we'll get the research. I'll get the research slides up. And Thanks for your question. These are the best parts of my talk. And feel free to come up and look at any of the literature or the specimens.
So may I ask, maybe this will come up in the next session. The bones, have they been recolonized?
That's right.
Have the bones and the bats come back?
Well, we're gonna see some data. And the answer is, I'm not sure if they ever. It was a pretty localized fire. Maybe there were some, there were, as far as I know, no bodies were found.
I mean, there are other palms around, but the same species must be using it. They could have
Yes.
come in. They don't have banding studies ever shown that ask if an adult doesn't have, a female, I guess, doesn't have babies to care for, is there any reason she must come back to exactly the same place?
No, but they do tend to have established maternity colonies and locations. And males aren't there. Males all have their all
I just like so evolutionary.
And how they get up.
So the moths are up at 10,000 feet also. It's incredible. In land where you've got elevation of maybe 500.
If there's food, the little brown bat is one that goes anywhere at altitude. It's the only species I record when I'm in the high country Yosemite.
Yes.
If I go down lower in the valley, I think there are 15 or 16 species.
But the moths that are migrating are up that high.
Oh, well, I'm not sure. 10,000 feet is to go get the bug. It's because the food's at 10,000.
Yeah.
They're gonna migrate like birds to core, at least energy to get from point A up there. Yes,
I was of the impression that bats cannot take off
not true.
apparently because of the one that, crawls around on the ground, but,
I've seen little browns. I heard that too. They opened a shutter. I was up in Montana doing a little quick, and one of them fell to the ground. It was daytime, and it worked a little days. First I cut it, it was gone.
okay, so that's a myth, that's just.
As far as I know. But that's a great call. Well, now, Western mastiff bats, the really big ones,
Right.
they're gonna roost like a split mountain. They're gonna roost up at least 100 or so feet. They need, I forget how much, it's 20 or 30 feet, free fall to catch, when they take off.
But they're not gonna land, they're not gonna fly into the water
No.
to drink.
Well, if they don't land, if they're drinking over water, they just.
They glide over
Right,
the
right,
water.
right.
Okay. Interesting, thank you very much.
Sure.
I remember reading that it was years ago, all these bats being infected by bacteria. Are you going to talk about that?
I'm not, because we don't have it here, but it's kind of my campfire talks I do, or I can tell you about it later on.
There have been advances made in that.
There's a lot of study trying to understand. It came from Europe. They're bats. Either the ones that are still there survived it.
So is it still spreading?
It is still spreading. It's spreading across the country. It's spreading across Canada. It turned the little brown bat from a very common species into now an endangered species. 100% die off.
So I'm wondering if there's been advances made in treat
They're
them.
trying to come up with treatments. So can they dog medicines on them to
How would you treat
subjugate
them?
it? They're finding in some colonies, some of them make it through the illness. They sort of natural selection of the ones that have natural resistance are the ones that carry on. But yes, it's still a huge concern, and it's being studied in labs all through the country.
But it's not.
It's a fungus. And this big issue is they just come up when there's no food, when they're hibernating, metabolism makes them not breathe for like 48 minutes, their heart rate goes down to 0. But this thing is irritating you to wake up. You know, they fire up the engines, but there's no replenishment flight start. That's one of them. Yes,
Question about that, imagine the eighth nerve is huge, isn't it?
the which,
The eighth nerve is huge. Where's it go?
I don't know about that. There's a lot of study of physiology. Hopefully, I have it. Gosh, I took out a number of images at the time. The cochlea is very dense bone structure and has very highly evolved musculature to process those sounds. So in Pallidat, I did a CT scan of Pallidat. The densest was teeth and the cochlea. Thank you. I have not heard one way or the other. I'm not going to be here. So I haven't seen any.
Last two. Because my wife, she counts.
Said they were hiding in the cave. Two people came out and started watching. They're on the still. It's the same party. So they're in the fronds. So one advice is if you got fronds, don't trim them in the spring because they could have babies.
So they don't discriminate. They can, that's for sure.
I think they're mostly in the dead fronds. That's what we're talking for.
Yeah, so that must have
So you don't know what the numbers were before?
No, so it's no baseline, nobody's.
You should put your finding.
Oh, yeah.
So you think it's a different. They fly away. High temperature jump.
Plenty of farms. That's the yellow bass actually. There's more in Arizona. This direction, with more palm. I mean, ours are
Okay,
native.
so the
palm.
rate. is expanded because of the humus.
Yeah, I mean, there's just yellows for Canada. They'll say something native palm. Say native palm, Washington County, but they were planted for landscape. So yeah, we didn't rescue that. That Lily was in San Diego, and she's one that, you know, someone was trimming palms and she fell out. I'm a volunteer for the park. So volunteer with the Natural History Museum.
Is your background? Oh, okay.
I've always been interested in you.
So is it, I have some product, I work for the department. Okay. And at college, I have 586 patent stations. I don't know much about, I've done a little bit of all that stuff, analysis, you know. How difficult it would be for, you know, so basically ground zero to have to go. Is there some available?
Tutorials. This particular device is made by Wildlife Acoustics, it's microphone. And they have, the process I use, their software, too, and they have tutorials about it. I did a lot of things with National Park Service, and so I've done some formal classes.
Yeah, it's that's not.
And the other thing is it's reading everything. But it's actually pretty straightforward. If you got any, it's open to use some of the technical sound.
Because I've been up. Yeah.
Are you coming tonight?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. And it's got software on board that makes guesses about the species, and some of them are pretty good.
And that's just like
That's an iPad mini. But you can use the phone too. This lasts all night. The phone. This power is like. And it's waterproof, it's all sealed up. So for the first few years, technology very so there's a, this is the pro version, and I think it's $350. There's a cheap one, that's $200, but this is the software version. So you're $350 plus your device and some cables.
what's it called?
Speedometer touch and wildlife. Yeah. Independent, and birds evolved much earlier. I think the older birds are 40, something like that. So they're back from animals. So it's more like this mammal found a niche of night origin and flight. I've seen a documentary that suggested that butterflies evolved to way back. There's a PBS documentary called That's Flying Butterfly. You can write about it.
All right, I think it's time to get back to it.
It's at 23 minutes for this 20-minute presentation. We're doing pretty well. All right, can we take our seats here? So now we're going to talk about the research project. You already saw the slides about the fire, where it was located. So my device is right in the center of the grove. This is a microphone at the top of a tripod I have there. I was actually back up there today to reset my clock for daylight savings time. It has a view upward into the canopy here. There it is again over here on the far right. This is what the grove, I'm trying to remember, this is probably 2020. So you can see it was pretty torched, not much growing there. And then I have my bat recorder in a plastic box under, keep it out of the sun. This, for the first 9 months, I hike up on the first to put it up, and I can go up on the 15th to bring it out. So my data set is 2 weeks, which gives me more sample than if I put it the traditional 4 nights, which is kind of the standard for field acoustic. But I got tired of driving out from San Diego. It's a 5.5-hour proposition door to door. So about last November, I just started leaving it. So I just go up and replace memory cards or batteries. So it's still doing fine. It's been there for 2 years. The grove is still closed. It's really overgrown getting in and out. So I don't think there's any chance that someone's going to take it. Come on, let's go to the next slide. There we go. Now we go. So this is what the recorder looks like in that plastic box. 4 D-size batteries, got 2 memory slots right there. And the microphone is a separate device. It's on the cable. So that's why I can put it on a tripod, have it faced up, keep the recorder protected. Let's see, do I want in the spirit of time? The calls are triggered So it's not like you're continuously just listening. The bat call triggers a recording to start. And it either ends when the call sequence, the bat passed by and it shuts off, or it was there long enough and it's got a maximum time. So you're getting, what you're getting are wave files. So the same as music files, only these were ultrasonic. So if I played these files back on a stereo, you wouldn't hear anything, because the stereo equipment wouldn't process that high frequency. I have 14 nights. It starts at 30 minutes before sunset and turns off at 30 minutes after sunset. With those 4 batteries, this time of year, it'll last all month. In the summer, things really get hopping around here. Each call uses up some of the battery, and either I run out of memory card or I run out of battery before the end of the month, but I always get my 14 days. I process them after the fact on the computer. We'll see that in a second. And we saw some of these displays. I happen to be using software from the manufacturer of the device, but it works with any wave files that are BAT calls, called Kaleidoscope. And I use a feature that's called auto detection. So there are reference libraries that compares the call to species that were reference calls. I've actually contributed to their library for pocketed freetails. So it makes a guess, but some of those guesses are just totally wrong. So I manually inspect to validate. We're going to see that I have to do that judiciously, because in July, when it's really hopping up there, I'm getting 2,000 calls a night. And what you're going to see on my plots is I had 88,000 calls in the first year. That's a lot of files to look at. Each one of those, by the way, is about 5 to 6 megabytes. So I'm on my third 4 terabyte drive. This is a workflow. So the device is doing the recording. I get the memory cards. I transfer that data to my laptop. I do it by day. There's so many calls that if I did them by month, it would just, it would never get done. So I organize by day, which turned out to be surprisingly valuable, because I can see day-to-day trends. And I started learning some things that there are cycles over the period, not just annually, but day-to-day. Who's there and how active they are. So I organize it by date, process the data, use their auto classifier, and I've got the spreadsheet from whatever. It's the most complicated spreadsheet I've ever done to organize that data. I don't want to spend too much on words here. Let's see some results. So my tables, this is 1 month, May 2020. So this is the earliest data I have following the fire in January. And I've already got, let's see, Laxa, that's Western yellow bat. I had 739 detections. So there are bats around 2 months, 2.5 months after the fire. The reason I don't have April data when I started was we had a device failure. I was using a prototype and there was this cold solder joint, and I got no data. So I have a different one now. Month-to-month analysis. So this is one species. This is a yellow bat. We're going to see this over and over again. May, June, I'm not sure why July. I think that year I had, well, I don't have an explanation for that. So this is kind of the curve. In the winter, it drops way off. And we're here in April. So those of you on our field trip, we're just now into the ramping up in activity. It's getting warmer. There's more food. And this is also baby time. So there's more activity. If we had done this walk in December, we probably would have seen almost nothing.
Do they hibernate or?
Some species, okay, the question is, do they hibernate? Western yellows go into a lower state. I don't know that they may migrate some, or they're just, I know the species that I'm particularly interested in, the Townsend's big ear, goes into torpor. So when it gets cold, they kind of shut down, but then it warms up, they go out and find something to eat, but it's not as much activity. Some species have migrated out and they're coming in. It's really about food. So let's see, and again, I got all these tables by species, by month, and I want to show you some plots. I'm using auto classification because it was the easiest way, really the feasible way to look at a lot of data and get the big picture, which is all I was really after. And I can go back and spot and stuff. It's only as good as the reference calls and the logic that's in the classifier. Some would say, oh, they're maybe 90% accurate. Some would say 70% accurate. I found with some species, it's really good. It pretty much nails Western yellow bats. It nails canyon bats. It gets confused around 20 kilohertz. It'll get pocketed freetails. It kind of confused with Mexican freetails and hoary bats. Hoary bats could be here migrating, but there would never be very many and not nearly as many calls as I get. So you have to use them with judgment and I guess awareness that it's not 100%. And as we talked about earlier, this isn't really a nose count. This is a detection count. So I've recorded up at Big Sur. Wherever I go camping, I record. And there was a Big Sur, and there were Unimyotas, and they were on this Big Sur River right by our campsite. And I'm guessing there were 15, 20 of them that like water. I think that night I had 1,500 calls just because they kept going and going and going and going. Bat classifiers are better for a single bat, free space, doing its prototypical call. Put them in clutter like a palm grove. Put them with fellow bats. Put them in almost anything that's other than that free space individual bat, then the characteristics are different. And there are really no reference libraries for those circumstances. So my data should be considered an approximation of what's going on. And again, for these purposes, it's good enough. We can certainly process a lot of data. So, and it's a little more close up of the microphone and recorders back under that rock. So here was the first 12 months. So we had the fire. May, I'm not sure what happened in June. Sometimes there are cold spells. There wouldn't be a cold spell in June. Sometimes the bats are there and sometimes they're not. And I can't really say why. I can kind of get a feel for day to day when we have a cold snap. But anyway, that's what happened. And a pretty smooth curve. These are total detections. So I know these are 100% bat calls. This isn't by species. And we're just now ramping up in April. So I'm in year 2 now, and year 2 is somewhat, so year 2 is the blue. Year 2 is somewhat higher, but not a whole lot higher than the first year. And we can see it's a more reasonable level of activity last June of 2021 than whatever that anomaly is in 2020. And it all kind of flows back. I actually have data now. I got the cards yesterday for March. It takes me a while to process it, but I expect it to be similar. The auto classifier came up with 17 species, which is pretty remarkable. We have 22 in the county, 45 in North America. And at least 3 of these, I think, are suspect. We could have Western red bats, but their calls are very close to canyon bats in clutter. So there are riparian species. They could be there when there's water, but I suspect it's not. I don't think they're really there. Hoary bats, migratory, they could come through here, but I don't have any definitive calls that I would bet money on that that's a hoary bat. And Lima, that's a big free-tailed bat. They're very close, but down from a pocketed free-tail. So I think all the Nimas were the pocketed free-tail, which is a colony in the canyon. So total, I think there are 14 species out of the 22 in the county in that one spot, which is pretty cool. I keep a yard list, birders keep bird yard lists. I keep a bat list. I've got 11 in my backyard. Not that live there all the time, but at one time or another come through. And little distraction. We've lived in that house for Scripps Ranch, so it's kind of almost fringe habitat for San Diego. But it's not immediately next to an open space. And lived there since '86. Had no idea I had bats. The day my first recorder arrived, put it on device, and I walked out the front door, and I didn't get 2 steps out the front door, and I had hemomyosis. It turned out they've been there all the time. They're just out there every night, not bothering me, didn't even know they were there. So bats are around, we don't pay attention to them. It's not, it's not in our normal routine. These are photos, except for the yellow bat. I don't have a good one of that yellow bat, but these are photos I've taken over time of species detected. Yellow bat's the one we were studying. This is at the pupfish pond, by the way. California myotis, that's another common one. I did a few Townsend's big-eared. I really like that bat. Pocketed freetails, that's a colony that's, there's a colony in Palm Canyon, and wherever I record around here, pocketed freetails show up. Mexican freetail, that's one we saw, flying out in the millions. Here's our pallid bat and little canyon bat. In addition, I got a few California leaf-nosed bats. I actually had someone here in town, to Sally Terrio, send me a photo. They had one of those in their garage. That's a very cool bat. They're more toward the Colorado River generally. Long-eared myotis, I was surprised to get these. And I don't have a French myotis, but they started showing up last summer, and I'm pretty confident about the falls. They're a bigger myotis. Myotis is the mouse-eared bats. I get a lot of these western small-footeds. So won't be a quiz on this, but the most common species for canyon bats, pallid bats, western small-footed, and for some reason, last year I started getting a bunch of the long-eared myotis. Just give you some of the example calls. So we've had the little tutorial on what their calls look like. I went through all those 88,000. I found some that were, definitely that's the species. Here is a western yellow bat, classic 35 kilohertz, tends to be a J shape, goes up and down. Recognize it in an instant. This is a pallid bat. It's a little bit lower. These are the chatty ones, or scorpion eaters. This is a western brown, a big brown. I was surprised to find these. I started picking them up in town, and the calls are really close to pallids, but I'm pretty sure these are western big browns. So California myotis is 50 kilohertz bat, real high. They eat little insects. This is pocketed freetail. These are the ones I hear everywhere. They're so loud. We'll hear these tonight. They're a little under 20. And let's see. This is the canyon bat, 45 kilohertz metronome. This is the California leaf-nosed bat. Some bats hunt on this main frequency, some hunt on a harmonic, a multiple. So when you see up here 50 and then one that's about half of that, pretty definitely a California leaf-nosed. Again, mostly over by the Colorado River. And this was the highlight of the whole study for me. It was a way cool thing. Is last summer I had 2 really short sequences of spotted bat. Now, spotted bats are known over on the other side of the Coachella Valley. It's a beautiful bat with legs that are white and black, pink. These are the first detections in the state park. So Danny added it to the mammal list based on these recordings. I did vet it to the Natural History Museum first. I'm not making this up. Cyclical daily activity. So this is yellow bat, western small-footed, California myotis, you can see this sort of almost a week-long variation. So this wave, they get a peak and then they drop off, they ramp back up, and they don't peak on the same days. So I don't think it's exactly weather. And they don't peak, their durations are variable. They're not all the same by species. So somehow they're figuring out when they want to be there, obviously when they're hungry.
What are the two colors on those charts?
Okay, the reason this is because my detector picked up long-legged myotis, and that's a northern species. You get those up in Canada or cold places. So rather than, after I got a year into this, rather than mess around teasing out, going back and change all the data, I just lump them together and say, yeah, that's a 40 kilohertz bat. That's a Western small-footed. That's a species I was surprised when I started recording by the visitor center. That was one of the most common bats there, right by the pupfish pond outside the door. And I could go there in the evening and see them circling there, only about this high, the kind of floppy flight. Good question. I'm still inventing ways to represent this data. This mica has two colors because their call is almost indistinguishable from Yuma myotis. But I'm pretty convinced these are California. Yumas like water, they like foraging over water. Yuma myotis are around my house. They kind of displaced California. So, good news. It still supports a diverse and significant presence. 88,000 calls in a year. In the summer, I started using 64 gigabyte memory cards. And in July, I only made it to day 13. It has 2 slots that roll over to the next one. So now I use 128. That's a lot of bats. I think the yellow bat, the one that was written up as tragically lost in the fire, is still there at seasonally appropriate levels. It's down in the wintertime and it's there in the summer. The bat activity in the summer months is no really big surprise. Slight improvement, so maybe things are getting better. Maybe they're coming back to the grove. Or what I suspect, and I don't have it on this slide, is I think there are more important trends than that fire influencing all sorts of wildlife, including our bats. I mean, I'm sure you read the UT article about climate change, Annie and Mark and all that stuff. I am seeing, just in a subjective way, reduced insect populations. And that's the bottom of the food chain for a whole bunch of things, including bats. So I think that the lack of water are probably moving things around, coping, adapting, whatever they need to do, more than a fire that was probably at the greatest extent 100-foot diameter, 100 yards diameter, and there are other problems there. But it was a good excuse to find out who's up there. And let's see, I don't think I'm gonna. These are kind of the punchlines. I'll make sure we have time for questions. And as I said, there was no baseline, so we're going to get a baseline in reverse that unfortunately has an overlay of what's going on with the drought. So it might be 10 years from now before we find out what the real base population would have, should have been. One of the bennies of walking up there twice a month is who you see. And I want to be careful while I say this. I was so fortunate to have Borrego Palm Canyon as a private reserve, a personal private reserve for most of 2020. First 2 times, the park wasn't so sure about it, so I went up with a biologist, to make sure I'm a legit or I'm not going to die up there. And then they kind of got tired of going up. So yeah, and then when we had the sheep count incident, it got closed again. So last year it was closed for a period. So lots of sheep, summer months in particular. Some great bird sightings. And that's another one today. I had a desert iguana foraging on a creosote. I hadn't seen that. Climbed up the creosote and it's looking awesome. Lots of perps. This is an interesting one. This is coming up. this pair of red spotted toes mating at the first, not the first crossing, which is often dry, but when you cross over to the alternate trail side and go up to that upper crossing, it gets you on the north bank. There's usually water there, running water. And this pair was there a year and 6 days to the date in the same spot. I mean, they were within 3 feet of where they had been. Now, they didn't stay there all year, but they must really like that nuptial spot.
You know, it's the same individuals.
What's that?
You know, it's the same individuals.
I would say, well, if they live a year, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I mean, I didn't get name IDs or anything. And odds and ends, in the summer, there's not a whole lot of water in the grove. And this was last year too, a pretty big lamb, still nursing. So I'd like to thank my local support team with state parks, Drew Stokes, who I support at Natural History Museum, Seco here in San Diego, he's come up, helped me do memory cards at times, and the folks at Wildlife Acoustics who have supported the effort. Questions? This is a count and figure that's up in the Laguna, so. Yes, sir.
Do you have any studies of the time of day where the animals are most active?
So did do I know what time of day the animal's most active? And the answer is yes, I do, because the call recordings are date time stamped. And what I tend to see, which you would see just around here observing, is canyon bats are early and late. So they're around sunset and sunrise. Counts and figure, these guys tend to show up around 4 in the morning. I don't know what up there. I've had them in the campground at 9. Some of them are middle of the night. Some of them are continuous. Some of them are seasonal and just show up when they want to. But yeah, I could, there are all sorts of, with this data set, there are all kinds of analyses that could be done if somebody was inspired. Yes.
Question going way back. The bats are mammals, and you're saying the mothers go out and they forage and then they come back and feed. So if they're mammals, how do they feed? Do they breastfeed the animals?
Yes.
Or babies?
Okay, so the question is, bats are mammals, and the moms go out and forage and come back, and how do they feed the baby? They have nipples, they produce milk, and the babies are dependent, it takes them, depending on the species, 4 to 6 weeks to learn how to fly and be on their own. So in that time, mom is catching insects, turning them into milk, feeding milk. And I get, this is a campfire talks, but generally bats have 1 baby. Some often have twins. The little western red bat can have up to 4. That's unusual. Babies are really big. If you were a bat mom, but your current size, your babies would be 30 pounds or more. And imagine having twins. And oh, by the way, you get to carry that baby flying and hunting and catching insects. I mean, you don't get a day off. You don't have, your maid out, the maid's long gone. They did their thing in the fall and aren't anywhere near. So yeah, you're on your own. Sometimes they have to relocate the babies even after they're born if they feel there's a threat to the roost. Great question.
How many years more does your study go?
How many more years? Well, how many more years am I willing to do it, I guess is the deal, because this is just, a personal project that the state endorsed. I think I'll do at least year 3. I might shift to quarterly. That's $6 a gallon, and
I only ask because we count swings and hawks,
yes.
and they tend to come through more when there's a bloom and there are the caterpillars, which are protein.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, we haven't had a bloom, we haven't had caterpillars, or at least we're going to be doing it 2 years. But if there was a bloom and there was a lot of caterpillars, were bats interested in eating that kind of protein? Or?
So the main caterpillars the sphinx is after the sphinx moth. And I don't think they're that dependent on them. That's a pretty big insect. You know, when it turns into a moth, that's a sizable part. Mexican creatures, I'm sure we've all know. I don't know. The question is, do the insects that sort of support the Swainson's migration, is that something the bats are interested in?
Or would it impact them in any
Yeah,
way?
I can't really say. I don't know. There are plenty of moths around. If you go to the high school tonight, we'll see them. You'll see the insects up around the lights. There are plenty of insects that are more their size, more reliable. Other question.
There's a few questions. Tom is wondering, how long do bats live?
So Tom asked, how long do bats live? A surprisingly long time. Many of them will live 10 years or more. I think the oldest on record was the European bat. I can't remember the species now. 42 years, I think is the number on. It's close to that. They're surprisingly disease-free. That's another area of research study. Why is that? So there are some attributes in their DNA. One of the things that I've read is they don't overreact with antibiotics to disease, which does all sorts of things to us. I mean, sometimes our reaction to the disease is as bad as the disease. So it looks like in some cases they kind of encapsulate it rather than trying to, you know, 5-alarm fire response. So some of that is thought to be due to the metabolism, very high metabolism. And I don't have a definitive answer, but they do live long times, which gets to bat boxes. So if you build a bat box and you attract bats, make the commitment to it because they're going to be around a while. You're talking about a 10 or more year proposition and even longer because of generations if you're successful. Another question.
Joe Allen is wondering, which recording device and software are you using?
Okay, so in the Grove, which recording device and software? I'm using the Wildlife Acoustics SM4 microphone, and I'm using the Song Meter bat recorder. So that was what those photos were. So if you look up on the Wildlife Acoustics webpage, you can see those devices. And well, that's what I use there. So for our field trip, I use this little mini bat, which is also Wildlife Acoustics built-in microphone, because I want to see who is where, who is at what times of the tones. Other questions?
Okay, final question. Is there a recommended method for repelling bats that are using a wood patio cover for temporary roosting while they're eating at night? So their intention is to cause no harm to the bats. They like the bats, but they're making a significant mess. And they're asking, will bright lights discourage them?
Bright lights will attract bats. Bright lights are going to attract insects, that's why the bats are coming. So there are some online resources to consider for how to exclude bats. Usually the issue is how do I get them out of my attic or an enclosed space? And that involves a variety of techniques, including making sure that and there are people who do this professionally, that you do it when there aren't babies and you do it in a thorough way so the bats can get out, and you close all the entrances, which can be really tiny. Bats can get into things that are like a 1/4 inch. Yeah. But good.
That was it.
Well, thanks. Oh, I got another question here.
No.
I know we're over time, but I'm here.
I have a quick answer.
Wait, okay.
I got a windsock that's kind of aluminum fluffy thing, which you know we have. So I had exactly that problem with puddles of stuff, and it worked. They just went around to my carport and had a good day.
Okay, so the proposed solution, if you heard that on webinar, was you did a wind
It's
chime.
a windsock.
Windsock.
Aluminum fluffy.
Okay, a windsock that
It worked, but they went back.
they went and found a new home. Yeah. Or they went to your neighbors, which would be better, right? Okay, I have another video to show, but I know we're at the end of our time, so I'm gonna give Brianna, how would you like to handle it? I wanted to show you a night vision at the place we're gonna do the field trip. See what that can look like.
Yeah, I think if folks are ready to sign off of the Zoom, I think they're good to go, so you can just.
Okay,
For anyone interested, go ahead and
Okay.
stay. Don't feel like you have to stay. If
That's
you're
right.
tired of sitting, go ahead and we won't be insulted if you're ready to call and stay.
this lasts about 2 minutes. I wanted to show it for a couple of reasons. I didn't bring my scope in. I've got a night vision, they're called starlight scopes, so they have a intensifying tube. They illuminate, you can see the surroundings. And I use that at times for bat cave exits and you can do census counts that way. And this was the same location where I had the 3 different species. And we're gonna go there tonight. I didn't see any of the last 2 nights, but I recorded a few. I'm gonna show you. This is at the Hoburg, Desert Resort. And I'll make that bigger. So you'll see, let me go back to the beginning. There were some good, these are, yes, the big ones are the Western yellows. Oop, I went one. That's some more out there. So, I mean, if you're into bats, you can just go find some lights and sit there and have your evening entertainment. And I have the recorder there, so I have the soundtrack. If this wasn't on, you wouldn't hear anything. Those are bats, yeah. And the Western yellows they're pretty loud and they're around 35 kilohertz, so they're a conspicuous call. Another place we're gonna go tonight is the Center Market. So we wanna, is the webinar off, did you say? Okay, so it doesn't matter. So we're gonna start out at Howard, Falls at Indian Head, which is this site, and watch sunset, and we'll see if anybody shows up. For some reason, the canyon bats are shy this week, so they're coming out after dark. But we'll get a few recordings. Then we're gonna go to the high school and have the lights on, and you'll definitely see Mexican freetails there. And then we're gonna go around to Center Market. So on the northwest corner, there's that, we pack all the cardboard boxes in that corner. There used to be a trailer there. But there's a light and there's a cameras. And that's it. For some reason, Western yellow is the species that we care about, likes that spot. A couple of years ago, I was there a little bit earlier and I was seeing nighthawks foraging, Western nighthawks, and they started turning into Western yellow bats. So it's like a changing of the shifts. There were nighthawks, and they stayed around, but then the bats sort of were leading the show. I've seen the same thing east of Poway with swallows at twilight on the Iron Mountain Trail. There's one called Wild Horse Pond. If you'd like, I can send you links to some YouTubes. And it starts being swallows, and then it starts turning into bats as it gets darker and darker. So it's like, again, they have the same niche, but they have a different time. Thanks so much for attending, your patience. If you haven't seen the specimens, they're up here for you. And I'm happy to answer any questions while I'm packing up.
And real quick, folks, thank you so much for coming out and supporting the Anza-Borrego Foundation. So 6:30 tonight in Christmas Circle. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and my information is on the email that went out, and my cards are up there too. So thanks again for coming out, and we're looking forward to seeing a lot of you tonight. Thank you.
So good night out there, webinar room too.